Self-sabotage often stems from cognitive distortions like all, or nothing thinking or overgeneralization, which can trigger stress responses in the amygdala, a part of the brain involved in emotional reactions. When you experience such thoughts, your brain may react with heightened alertness and anxiety. Mindfulness techniques are effective for increasing awareness of these negative thoughts without judgment. For example, if you catch yourself thinking, "I always fail," practice rephrasing it to something like, "Sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't." This reframing helps create a more balanced perspective. Consider the case of someone who repeatedly procrastinates on important tasks due to fear of failure. By practicing mindfulness and rephrasing negative thoughts, they can start to see patterns in their behavior and work towards changing them. Over time, these strategies can help shift the brain's default response from self-sabotage to a more constructive approach. This mechanism explains how altering thought patterns can change neural responses, making it possible to hack your brain for better outcomes. Moving forward, we will explore specific techniques and examples that demonstrate this process in action. Cognitive distortions like all, or nothing thinking or overgeneralization can trigger a response in the amygdala, a key part of the brain responsible for emotional reactions. When these distorted thoughts are present, the amygdala activates heightened alertness and anxiety, setting off a stress response. For instance, consider someone who thinks, "I always fail." This thought pattern can activate the amygdala, leading to increased stress levels. However, by reframing this thought into something more balanced, like, "Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't," you shift away from triggering that stress response in the brain. Instead of activating neural pathways associated with heightened anxiety and failure, you engage those related to a constructive approach. The effectiveness of this mechanism depends on how consistently you can apply it. There's some uncertainty about its universal applicability because individual differences in brain chemistry and past experiences can influence outcomes. Despite these uncertainties, reframing thoughts can be a powerful tool for managing self-sabotaging behaviors by changing the emotional intensity and neural pathways involved. This bridge leads us into examining the observable variables involved in this process, where we'll look at specific techniques and examples that demonstrate how it works in action. When you experience a moment of self-sabotage, it often starts with a thought. Cognitive distortions like all, or nothing thinking or overgeneralization can trigger the amygdala, the part of your brain that processes emotions and stress responses. This can cause an increase in heart rate or sweating, signals that your body is preparing for a fight or flight response. For instance, if you find yourself thinking, "I always fail," turn it around to say, "This was just one mistake. I have many strengths." By doing so, you are creating a constructive approach that reduces emotional intensity. The effectiveness of this method lies in the observable variables involved. Physiological responses such as heart rate or sweating can be measured and serve as indicators for when your amygdala is activated. Mindfulness techniques help you notice these signals early, allowing you to intervene before the stress response fully engages. It's important to note that while initial evidence suggests this approach can be powerful, there's still uncertainty about how consistently reframing thoughts impacts long-term brain reprogramming. However, by focusing on observable variables and mechanisms like heart rate or sweating, you can systematically address self-sabotaging behaviors without relying on vague advice or unproven methods. Understanding these observable signals helps bridge the gap between thought patterns and more balanced perspectives, making it easier to manage stress responses and prevent self-sabotage. When you experience self-sabotaging thoughts, the amygdala may react by activating heightened alertness and anxiety. This response triggers a stress reaction within your body, making it more likely for you to engage in behaviors that undermine your goals or well-being. For example, if you overgeneralize a single failure as evidence of overall inadequacy, this negative thought can cause the amygdala to signal increased emotional distress. Reframing these thoughts into something more balanced can help reduce the intensity of such reactions. By recognizing and changing destructive thought patterns, you can create a constructive approach that diminishes stress responses and prevents self-sabotaging behaviors. However, it's important to note that what works for one individual may not work for another due to differences in brain chemistry and past experiences. Competing methods associated with hacking your brain to stop self-sabotaging include mindfulness techniques, cognitive, behavioral therapy, and medication. Each of these methods offers a different pathway to managing stress responses and changing thought patterns. Mindfulness practices can help you become more aware of automatic thoughts and emotional reactions without judgment, while CBT focuses on identifying and challenging irrational beliefs that contribute to self-sabotaging behaviors. Medication may be prescribed to address underlying conditions like anxiety or depression that exacerbate these issues. Understanding the observable signals from your amygdala helps bridge the gap between thought patterns and a more balanced perspective. This process makes it easier to manage stress responses and avoid self-destructive actions, but individual results can vary widely based on unique neurological and emotional factors. The effectiveness of reframing cognitive distortions to stop self-sabotaging behaviors can vary widely. This is because the process depends on several observable variables, such as the initial thought pattern and how strongly it activates the amygdala. For instance, if someone has an all or nothing thinking pattern about a task not going perfectly, this can trigger the amygdala to activate heightened stress responses. However, when that same person reframes their thoughts into something more balanced, like recognizing minor improvements or seeing the situation as part of a larger whole, they create a constructive approach rather than spiraling into negative emotions. Individual variations in brain chemistry and past experiences mean that not everyone will respond identically to this technique. For example, someone with naturally high amygdala reactivity might find it harder to shift their thinking compared to another individual who has developed better stress management skills over time. This variability makes the effectiveness of reframing somewhat unpredictable. In summary, while cognitive distortions can trigger the amygdala response leading to heightened stress, reframing those thoughts into more balanced perspectives helps mitigate these effects. However, due to the context, dependent nature, and inherent variability in brain function, individual outcomes can differ significantly. The brain's response to cognitive distortions, such as all, or nothing thinking or overgeneralization, is complex and context-dependent. When these negative thought patterns are present, they can trigger a heightened alertness in the amygdala, which is a critical part of the brain involved in emotional reactions. This activation leads to an anxiety response that can amplify stress and make it harder to manage challenges effectively. For example, imagine you're facing a significant deadline at work. This can create a cycle where the emotional intensity of such thoughts makes it difficult for you to focus and perform well. The effectiveness of reframing these negative thoughts into more balanced perspectives depends on how well one can identify and address the underlying cognitive distortions. However, there is significant uncertainty about the precise boundary between cognitive distortions that lead to self-sabotage and those that do not. This means that what triggers an emotional response in one person might be less impactful or even beneficial for another. Understanding these mechanisms can help you make informed decisions about when and how to challenge your own thoughts, potentially leading to a more constructive approach to obstacles. Understanding how neuroplasticity allows the brain to change in response to new experiences, thoughts, or behaviors can help you manage your self-sabotaging patterns. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. This means that when you challenge and alter negative thought patterns, your brain can adapt and form more constructive pathways. For example, imagine a situation where you believe one mistake will undermine all your efforts. Initially, this distorted thought pattern might trigger the amygdala to react strongly, causing heightened stress and anxiety. However, by consciously reframing that belief into something like one mistake doesn't define my entire effort, you can begin to see changes in how your brain processes similar situations. As you continue to practice these reframing techniques, the neural pathways associated with positive thinking become stronger and more dominant, potentially shifting your overall mindset towards greater resilience. This adaptability in brain function shows that by understanding how cognitive distortions impact the amygdala, you can actively work to change your thought patterns and emotional responses. The key here is consistent practice and awareness of your own thought processes. Neuroplasticity allows the brain to change and adapt based on new experiences, thoughts, or behaviors. This mechanism is key in understanding how we can effectively hack our brains to stop self-sabotaging tendencies. The amygdala plays a critical role here. As part of the brain responsible for emotional reactions, it triggers heightened alertness and anxiety when faced with cognitive distortions like all, or nothing thinking, or overgeneralization. When these thoughts arise, the amygdala activates the body's stress response, increasing emotional intensity. By reframing such negative thought patterns into more balanced perspectives, we can alter neural pathways in favor of constructive approaches. This process demonstrates that our brain is malleable and capable of forming new connections based on experiences. For instance, consistent practice and awareness of your own thought processes can help you identify when these cognitive distortions are happening. Consider a scenario where you're facing an anxiety-inducing situation. Your amygdala could be responding with heightened stress due to overgeneralization or nothing thinking. However, by recognizing this pattern, you can reframe the thought into something more balanced and constructive. For example, instead of thinking "I always fail," you might think "I've succeeded in similar situations before." This reframing helps create a more positive outlook. While neuroplasticity offers powerful support for managing emotional intensity through cognitive distortions, it's important to note that the effectiveness of this approach depends on consistent practice. Changes in thought patterns over time can be observed and demonstrated, showing how reframing leads to improvements in mental well-being. Hormonal fluctuations, particularly those involving cortisol and adrenaline, also play a role in self-sabotaging behaviors, influencing our emotional states. For instance, when stress levels rise, the amygdala, a part of the brain responsible for emotional reactions, becomes more active. This heightened activity triggers a fight or flight response, causing increased alertness and anxiety. Cortisol, known as the stress hormone, increases during stressful situations, amplifying the body's physical reaction to perceived threats. Adrenaline, or epinephrine, is released alongside cortisol, increasing heart rate and blood pressure, preparing the body for immediate action. These hormonal changes can exacerbate cognitive distortions like all, or nothing thinking or overgeneralization, leading to self-sabotaging behaviors. Reframing these thoughts to create a more balanced perspective can help mitigate these effects. By shifting focus from extreme negative beliefs to constructive approaches, individuals can reduce the stress response fully. For example, if you find yourself thinking, "I'm going to fail," reframe it to something like, "I've prepared as much as I can, and I'll deal with any challenges that come my way." This method lies in demonstrating this process, recognizing initial evidence of cognitive distortions and then applying techniques that foster a more positive outlook, thereby decreasing the body's fight or flight reaction. Sleep deprivation can exacerbate self-sabotaging thoughts by impairing cognitive function and emotional regulation. When you lack adequate sleep, your brain struggles to regulate emotions effectively and to process information correctly. This impairment can lead to heightened anxiety and stress levels, which in turn may trigger more negative thought patterns and behaviors. The next movement will examine how sleep deprivation affects self-sabotaging thoughts, leaving room for the exploration of this critical aspect.